Good morning, children. Today in Social Science in History in class 9, we will continue the lesson Forest Society and Colonialism. We earlier talked about how the British government had banned shifting cultivation, or what is also called as swidden agriculture. Now, before the forest laws, many people who lived in or near the forest had survived by hunting small animals. Now, this was prohibited because of the new forest law. So now they were not able to do that also. And the British considered you can say that the large animals as sign of being wild, primitive society. And during the British rule, the scale of hunting increased largely. So it was seen that many animals almost became extinct. Their opinion was that killing these dangerous animals would civilize India. They gave rewards for killing these tigers, wolves, and other large animals so that there would be no threat to the cultivators. Initially, certain areas were reserved for hunting, but later on there were certain environmentalists and conservators who began to argue that these species of animals needed to be protected and not killed. So all this had a deep impact on the people. So if we see that there were new trades, new employments and new services. As we know that the forest department took control of the forest, and because of that there were people who suffered in different ways, because earlier people depended entirely on the forest products only, but there were some people who benefited also. And how did they benefit? Because there were new opportunities that had opened up in trade. So some people suffered, but at the same time there were opportunities for certain people because of the trade opportunities that were available for them. So as a result, many communities left their traditional occupations and they started trading in forest products. And this happened in India, but it also happened in the whole world. In the rest of the countries also the same thing happened. So we see that in the mid-19th century, demand for rubber was growing, it was increasing. And the Munduruku people of Brazilian Amazon began to collect latex from the wild rubber trees that were there in plenty, and they began to supply this to the traders. So that's how there was a shift, or there was a change from the traditional occupations, and they began to supply this to the traders. And then they became dependent on them only. In India, if we see that trade in forest products was prevalent, and from medieval period, the Adivasi communities traded. And what were the things that they traded in? Elephants and other goods like hides were there, horns, silk cocoons, ivory, bamboo, spices, fibers, resins, through these nomadic communities who were called Banjaras. So it was existing earlier also. Trade in the forest products was existing earlier also. But all this trade now was completely regulated by the British government. So now there was no the freedom that they enjoyed earlier, that was not there now. And as a result of this, the British policy, the law and the act, the British government gave many large European trading firms the sole right, that is only they had the right to trade in certain areas in the forest products. So this was how the lives of these people changed. Then grazing and hunting by local people were restricted. Earlier, they were able to freely take their animals and they would graze over there, and they were able to freely hunt wherever they wanted to in the forest, but now they were not allowed to do that because they were restricted. Then there were many pastoralist and nomadic communities like the Korava and Yerukala of the Madras Presidency who lost their livelihoods. So with all these restrictions that came upon them, it affected the animals also, and the hunting was not allowed by the local people. So all these restrictions were difficult for the people naturally because the freedom had been taken away from them because of the forest laws. So further on, if we see that these communities suffered, now how did they suffer? That is, these communities, in fact, they were not criminals, but they began to be called as criminal tribes. So this was the policy of the British towards these people who were living over there. So some of these communities, they were now called as criminal tribes, and as they belonged to these tribes, they were forced to work in factories, mines and plantations under government supervision. So they were virtually, you can say, compelled to work in the mines, factories and the plantations, and if they did not do that, then they were punished also. So out of fear, they would work out here at these places. But their living conditions was bad. They were given low wages and overall the conditions were bad. No doubt new opportunities in trade of forest products were created, but there was no improvement in the life of the forest people. Had there been any form of improvement, it would have been appreciated by the people. But it was only for the trading purpose and for the British and for the European traders, whereas their life was as miserable as ever. In Assam, both men and women from forest communities like Santhals were there, Orans were there from Jharkhand, and Gonds from Chhattisgarh, they were recruited to work on the plantations. Obviously, there were people required to work on the plantations, and this is how these people, these tribes, were made to work over there. So they suffered. How they suffered was, one is their wages were low and working conditions were also bad. And if they wished to return, it was not easy. They could not return easily. So these were the difficulties and the restrictions on them. So the low wages that they were receiving, and there was no improvement in the condition of these forest people, of these tribes who were made to work on these plantations, made it extremely difficult for these people to live their life. Then there was rebellion in the forest. In many parts of India and the world, forest communities began to rebel against the changes imposed on them, the forest acts and laws that were made. So it was not only in India and the other countries also, these forest communities began to rebel against all these restrictions that were imposed on them or that were levied on them. Some leaders of these movements were Sidhu and Kanu of Santhal Parganas, Birsa Munda of Chota Nagpur, Alluri Sitaram Raju of Andhra Pradesh. So there were some people who took the lead, who took the lead in order to rebel against all these forest acts, because of which they were subjected to so much of restriction on them. In 1910, rebellion took place in the kingdom of Bastar, which is located, it is in the southernmost part of Chhattisgarh, and many communities live out here in Bastar, such as Maria, Muria, Gonds, Dhurwas, Phatras and Halbas. They speak different languages, but they share common customs and beliefs. They make offerings at each agricultural festival. So, being part of the tribe, naturally, they were subjected to so much of restrictions, and there was a change in their life completely because of all these new forest laws and acts that came into effect. So there were some people who changed their occupation, there were some people who continued to live like this only, and there were some people who were not prepared to accept all these, and they began to rebel in the forest areas. Thank you.